everyone. My name is Amy, and on behalf of the Academic Writing Education Center, I welcome you to Reading to Connect. In our Week 4 lesson, today our topic is vocabulary building through context clue. Let's start. So when you're reading and you encounter an unfamiliar word, what do? Do you start to pick up a dictionary and look through it, or you start using your phone and Googling it? And if so, what happens? Does it interrupt your flow of reading and result in you have to go through everything again? So the building of vocabulary bank plays a vital role in this case because what happens when you don't have sufficient data bank, it could result in you misunderstanding the meaning of the author or the meaning of the article. At the end, you will have a fragment understanding of the reading. So during the process of reading, it is very normal, even for native speakers, to not understand certain words. So besides memorizing these words, are there more effective and more long-term learning methods? In this unit, we'll be looking at several techniques and skill sets that you can build to help you better build a stronger and more solid vocabulary bank. So in today's lesson, the first learning goal that we're trying to achieve is be able to recognize different forms of words and how to use them. The second goal we're trying to achieve is how to identify meaning and use these synonyms and collocations to be able to identify the meaning of a word. The third goal we're trying to achieve is that we're going to try to infer the meaning of a particular word, whether they're new or unfamiliar to you, by using multiple context clues. The fourth goal we're going to have is that we're going to let you know how to use electronic devices or dictionary to help you better understand a certain words that you're unfamiliar with. So before we begin today, we're going to look through a couple terms to let you understand better of the content of our lessons today. So our lessons is divided into three aspects. First, we're going to learn how to identify definitions and unfamiliar words in a text. Essentially, we're going to get these unfamiliar words out and we're going to teach you how to identify them. Next is inferring meaning from context words. Basically, we're looking at clues that is provided in the reading, and based on these clues, like Sherlock Holmes, we're going to find the answers. Third is that we're going to introduce to you how to use dictionaries or other technological devices to better assist you in finding out the meaning of these unfamiliar words. So let's look at the word context clue. There are four types of context clues that we'll be looking at today. The first one is word form, word parts, and how to use them. So essentially, the individual bits of what composes of a word and what do they mean. The second context clue we'll be looking at is definition and use of synonyms. So essentially, using words of the same meaning and integrate it with what we have already known to be able to understand what the new word means. The third type of context clue is using a multitude of different context clues, using basically signal words to let us know what the new word means. And the last, collocations. So through the pairing of, let's say, verbs, nouns, adjective, or adverbs, we'll be able to know how this word is used and what it means. So let's begin with the first context clue, word form, word parts, and usages. So when we are recognizing different word form, word parts, and different usages, essentially what we're talking about is understanding the component of a word and its function to allow us to understand the meaning of this particular word more easily and more effectively. So what we need to know is that in many English words, word is made of prefixes, root word, and suffixes. Now, with these different parts of the word, when they're put together, they create different meaning. So what happens is, when you have a cluster of words, although they all share the same prefixes, it could be that because of the different composition they later are put together, they actually all create different meaning. So that creates a little bit of complication when you're studying these words, but at the same time, they're a challenge to you to expand your word bank even further. Now, when we're looking at a word, first we're looking at its root word. The root word is usually located at the beginning or at the center of a word, but that is not 100%. sometimes it can't be located at the end, but usually it's located in the middle. Whereas the prefix is usually located at the beginning of a word, and the suffixes at the end of a word. So when we talk about root word, it's the main part of a word which expresses its meaning. With that root word, you may be able to add prefix or suffix to it to create different meaning. A prefix, like we just said previously, attaches itself to the beginning of a word. Now, based on this prefix, it can expand or modify the meaning of that root word. And the suffix, while it's at the end of the word, it usually expresses the part of speech that the word is trying to say. So basically, it tells us, is it a noun, is it a verb, is it an adjective, or an adverb? Let's look at two examples. The first example is deforestation. So the root word, first, we know that it is talking about cluster of tree. The word de, prefix, means not or none, whereas the ation at the end, the suffix, tells us that it is a noun. Let's look at the second one, unavoidable. The word able, the suffix, let us know that it is an adjective. The root word avoid means that we do not want to do it. And the prefix un, again like the word de, means to none or not do it. So before we talk more about word parts, there are some things you need to know and be aware of. With every single word, usually there's at least one particular root word. And many of these root words actually come from Greek or Latin words. For example, in Latin, the word socio means society, whereas in Greek, the word logi means the study of. If you put them together, Greek plus Latin, sociology, which means the study of society. Now, what you need to be aware of is that some words can contain more than one prefix, more than one root word, or more than one suffixes. In this case, they will contain multiple or contrasting meaning. So you definitely need to be aware of that. So the word could be in subordination, containing two prefixes, in and sub. The word can contain two root words, such as autobiography. So the word auto and bio. It could be that the word contains two suffixes, for example, hopelessness, less and ness, both being suffixes. Now, what makes building a word bank even more complicated is that sometimes the same meaning is expressed through different words. That is because language has been evolved through thousands of years, and with that, they have developed more complicated and more similarities and particularities. So looking at the prefix bi or dual, it actually expresses the same meaning of two or a pair. Now, with that in mind, it just creates more challenges for you to learn, but at the same time, it allows you to get a glimpse of how language evolves and how interesting it is. Now, let's look at some of the common examples with prefixes. So, let's look at the word trans. The word trans means to get across or to go beyond. So the word we may be looking at is the word transform, which is from A state to B state, or the word transgender, which is meaning from one gender to another. And then we look at suffixes. An example could be the word ish or like, which means something similar to or a little bit of. So for example, the word foolish could mean that they're fool-like. That doesn't mean that they're a complete fool. It's just that their action is slightly fool-like. Now, due to the scope of this lesson, we'll be focusing on suffixes that goes with nouns. Now we're going to be looking at the second type of context clue, which is definition and other synonyms. So when we are identifying definitions and the use of synonyms, what we're talking about is essentially when you see a new word or unfamiliar word appearing in the same text. Sometimes the author would worry that you do not understand that word. So right behind that word, they would use a different word. However, that carries the same meaning to expand or explain what the new word is trying to say. Let's look at an example. Genes are chemicals that contain information for making a plant or animal. Now, the word gene, perhaps the author worries that you do not understand. And so they use the word chemical that to use this noun clause to further explain to you what the word gene means and what it defines. So essentially, they're letting you know exactly what gene is through the use of further explanation. And we can also see from this example that they're using an adjective clause of that contains information for making a plant or animal. So again, further explaining and supporting what the word gene means. Let's look at the second example. With the combination of intelligence and manual dexterity, the ability to make and use tools, people have found ways to make much of the land on Earth usable. We can see that because the author wants to further explain to you, the reader, what manual dexterity means, they have provided the definition of the word in a bracket. And so that's how we know that manual dexterity is the target word that the author is trying to say by using grammar as a form of signal. Let's look at the third example. Reading texts full of spelling mistakes makes the comprehension of the text taxing or tiring, as it interrupts the perception of content. We can see the word taxing. Perhaps this is not a word that everyone knows. And so right after word taxing, the author actually provided the word tiring as a synonym to explain what the word taxing is. So we know that this is more of a negative word explaining what taxing means. Now we're going to look at the third type of context clue, which is multiple types of context clue. So when we talk about using multiple types of context clues, what we're talking about is the extended definition. It's the extended definition or the example clues. Now, these clues are usually found near the new word or the concept. The point of that is to elaborate its meaning. Now, sometimes these elaborations are provided to explain or expand the meaning of that word. It could be also talking about its functions, applications, or historical developments. So some of the common examples that can help us to identify is through particular signal words, such as including, such as, for example, or for instance, a typical example of, or to illustrate. With these particular signal words, we'll be able to locate the meaning of the unfamiliar words. Now, let's look at this particular example. Fluoroscopy is an imaging technique that uses X-ray to obtain real-time moving images of the interior of an object. In its primary application of medical imaging, a fluoroscope allows a physician to see the internal structure and function of a patient, so that the pumping action of the heart or the motion of swallowing, for example, can be watched. In this particular example, we use the first strategy, which is explaining what the noun means. So after the adjective clause, we explain it the target word fluoroscopy and what it does, what's so special about it. And after the second sentence is what we call the extended explanation to explain what the application of the technology can be used at. Now, when we're talking about using multiple types of context clues, we also talked about inference clues. Basically, it's an indirect or implied form of explanation around the unfamiliar word to allow the reader to be able to guess the meaning of that particular word. So usually the location of these inferences clues are located after the unfamiliar word or right before the unfamiliar word to act as part of the anticipation strategy. Now, with these particular inferences clue, what you need to be aware of is that often it will rely on your personal background experiences or your personal logical reasoning skills, partly because these meanings are usually implicit, which means that it relies quite heavily on your own ability to be able to get the meaning out of them. Now, let's look at an example. We're going to give you an article on how to treat common cold. Spend 1 minute, read through it, and see what are the new and unfamiliar words and whether or not you are able to identify their meaning. Let's go. How to treat a common cold. From the first itch in your nose to your final cough, a cold generally lasts from 7 to 10 days. Though researchers have yet to find a cure for these common but pesky viruses, some home treatments can provide relief from a cold's most unpleasant symptoms. During the first couple days of a cold, no symptoms will alert you that you've been infected. But by day 3, You will start to sneeze, your body may ache, and you'll likely have a tickle or soreness in your throat. Next, you'll feel congestion in your sinuses. Your nose will run, and due to your inflammation around the airways, you may develop a cough that can persist after your other symptoms are long gone. Fortunately, 2 weeks after the infection, you will produce antibodies that prevents you from catching that particular cold virus again. Unfortunately, there exists around another 199 strains of cold virus, so you can easily pick up another one. So how's your reading? So based on your reading, if you realize the word pesky is a word that you are unfamiliar with, it would result in you not understanding what the word pesky virus is. But based on the context of this article, you will recognize that it is a negative form of word that expresses a negative emotion. And so in the many clues that are presented in the second paragraph, for example, the symptoms of common cold, you will know that involves some uncomfortable situations such as congestion and inflammation. Based on what we talked about, we will be able to get a feeling that pesky is a concept that involves negative feeling. We can also infer that based on the signal words that are given in this particular reading, such as fortunately and unfortunately. Through this particular contrastive sentence structure, we will know that the word pesky expresses negativity. Now let's look at experiences clue. Now, experiences clue draws upon a reader's personal experiences or background knowledge to guess the meaning of an unknown word or unknown concept. With that in mind, these type of clue can usually be found within a sentence that contains information that might describe a common experiences, allowing you to integrate it with your personal experience and be able to use that to identify unfamiliar words. So taking this paragraph, for example, if you don't know or can't remember what the word congestion or inflammation means, you can get that through the explanation that follows. For example, a running nose, something around the airway, coughs. With these common experiences, because we're assuming you had a cold before, you'll be able to infer the meaning of what congestion or inflammation means. Now next, we are talking about comparison and contrast clues. These are opposite meaning words of the unfamiliar word with the new word. Now you may look for transitional words like but, however, in contrast, whereas, unlike, etc. But what you need to be aware of is that these words do not appear alone. They usually appear in a cluster of meaning, which means when you're looking at this particular signal word, you will need to find the explanation before or after, depending on the signal word, to be able to use that to identify the meaning of the new word or unfamiliar word. So let's look at example. The word proforestation and afforestation may seemingly be very close in meaning at first glance, but their meaning is actually very different. Now we're going to give you 1 minute. You need to glance through the text quickly to see whether or not you can identify the differences in these two seemingly close words. Let's go. Proforestation consists of growing existing natural forests as opposed to planting trees or forests where there is none. Proforestation versus afforestation. Based on the latest evidence from around the world, scientists singled out proforestation, growing existing natural forests, as key to addressing the accelerating crisis in climate and biodiversity. In many areas, proforestation is a more rapid, powerful, and practical option for sequestering carbon than afforestation. Planting trees or reforestation replacing logged forests. Now, based on this text, we can see that although we may not be so similar with one or two words, we'll be able to see how these words are definitely different through the phrase as opposed to see the differences between the word afforestation and proforestation. Now, based on your personal word bank and understanding of this text, you should be able to distinguish the differences. Next, we're going to talk about punctuation clues. Punctuation clues uses things such as commas, column, dashes, etc., or even parentheses or even italics to distinguish themselves as something special that the author wants to emphasize. And you may be able to use that to infer meaning on these new or unfamiliar words or concepts. So with these punctuation clues, they serve more than a function of basically separating different sentences or meaning chunks. It also implies the meaning or the definition the author is trying to say. So a lot of time we will see that certain words are italicized or put in a parenthesis or even using quotation marks. So let's look at some examples. Number 1, the use of X-ray, a form of ionizing radiation, requires a potential risk from a procedure to be carefully balanced with the benefits of the procedure to the patient. Now, the author wants to explain what the word X-ray is, so using a noun clause to explain it. But what we find with this particular noun clause is that it is separated from the rest of the paragraph using 2 different commas. So we know that the target word X-ray is being explained by this particular noun clause. So let's look at a second example. The French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu argued that we all possess certain forms of social capital. A person has, for example, symbolic capital, markers of prestige, and cultural capital, knowledge and cultural interests. These are forms of wealth that individuals bring to the social marketplace. Now, again, we see that the author is trying to explain what symbolic capital and cultural capital is. With that in mind, the author put in the explanation of these 2 particular words in a parenthesis right after each word to help you better locate the meaning of the unfamiliar word. Now let's look at the last type of context clue, which is collocation. So with collocation is more so a thing that we cannot change because people have been using it for such a long time that these collocations express individualistic and specific meaning when put together differently. Essentially, they are pairing of specific words to express unique meanings, and they cannot be changed based on whether or not you prefer it that way. So let's look at some example. In English, when we say food that are easily to obtain, we say fast food. But a synonym that also describes speed, such as quick, we would not be pairing it with food and call fast food as quick food. When we look at something quite quickly, again, we're describing a speed or a moment. We will also say a quick glance. However, we will not be saying a fast glance. When we want to talk about doing something with effort, we'll say make an effort instead of spend an effort. And when we want to talk about the word problem on how to solve it, we will always say solution to a problem instead of solution of a problem. So the pairing of noun, verb, adjective, adverbs, or even prepositions are all predetermined by thousands of years of habits and customs. It is not something that we can change lightly. And there are many different types of collocations. The first one that we see quite often will be adjective plus noun. So when we want to say that someone who has smoked for a very long time, we always say that they are heavy smoker instead of long-term smoker. When we want to talk about something that describes a contrast increase in pain, we will always use the adjective sharp instead of great. Next, we will have the collocation of a noun plus a noun. So for example, when we want to talk about professional opinions from people who have years of experience, we always say expert opinions. When we want to talk about policies or regulation from an official entity, we always say government policy. When we want to talk about the stealing of your identity, we always say identity theft. Next, the collocation could be a noun plus a verb. So some of the common ones to be seen, for example, when we talk about the progress of economy, we'll say the economy booms. When we want to describe that stock is going up, we always say the stock surges. When we want to describe an action that the engines made, we'll always say engines roar. Next, we're talking about verb plus noun. So when we talk about this particular collocation, with the noun suicide, the action of doing so is always commit. When we talk about the action of goal and how you can get there, we always say achieve goals. When we want to talk about a thread is made by someone with something, we always say pose a thread. Next, we're looking at a verb plus an expression or preposition. With this particular type of collocation, let's say we want to do an investigation, we'll always say carry out an investigation. When we want to say something like following the regulation, we always say it with comply with regulations. When we want to talk about how a decision is made, we will say arrive at a decision. Next, we're looking at verb plus adjectives. For example, we want to describe how widespread something is, we'll say become widespread or become visible. We want to describe how useful or successful something is as well as the state of it, we'll say remain. Next, the collocation could also be an adverb plus an adjective. So for example, we want to talk about two-party remaining in exclusivity. We'll say that they're both mutually exclusive. We want to describe someone being disappointed at a great length. We want to describe someone being extremely disappointed. We'll say that they're bitterly disappointed. Now that we're done with talking about context clues, we're going to talk about how to use dictionaries effectively. This is because despite the fact that you may learn and become familiarized with all these different context clues, to get the extreme precise meaning, it is perhaps still useful for you to look through a dictionary to ensure that you have not misunderstood based on your own personal assumption. So when you should use dictionary, you need to be aware that one single word could have multiple meanings. So in order to confirm all aspects of possible meanings, a dictionary will be extremely useful. Now, a dictionary could also be used at the end of your reading to make sure that you have confirmed your understanding and to cross-reference your understanding against a credible source. Now, to double-check whether or not you understood the word correctly, you can try to use this particular word in a sentence, in a phrase, or even writing a short segment of text to ensure that you know how to use this word in a proper context. Now let's go over some of the main components we learned today. Number one, it is essential for you to have a sufficient data bank of different vocabulary so that you may be able to comprehend the article or the reading with accuracy. Second, when you encounter unfamiliar word with new word or phrases, you can use contextual clues or check the dictionary for its meaning. Third, you may be able to infer the meaning of the word using the clues that are given before or after the unfamiliar words. Fourth, contextual clues includes many aspects. It includes you recognizing different word form, word parts, and different usages, identify definition or synonyms, example with explanations, word relationships, imply meanings, as well as comparison and contrastive signal words. It may also include using your prior knowledges or even punctuation marks to help you achieve your goal today. At the end of the day, if you're still unsure how a certain word is used, what its exact meaning, you can always use a dictionary or other technological device to assist you. So that's the end of the class today. I hope today's lesson has been useful to you in your journey of reading. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.